With that being said, though, let's move on to and get started with what I think is going to be a great webinar. I spent a lot of time with the Veracode people recently out at the RSA conference in San Francisco. They are one of the leading security firms that are really moving in or shifting security left into the development space and this whole DevSecOps arena that I personally get excited about. Our webinar today is called The Human Side of DevSecOps. As we see, if we go to the next slide, Tim, if it's okay. And we're very happy and lucky to be joined by Tim Jarrett. Tim has, as you could read it for yourself, but he's been with Veracode 9 years now, which is a really long time to be in any one profession in IT today. And you can see what else Tim has written about himself there. But Tim also has 20 plus years in software development and management. Tim, welcome to our webinar today.
Thanks, Alan. It's great to be here.
So you want to go into the Grammy Award and bacon numbers, or we'll just let it go?
There is a classical Grammy Award-winning recording that I performed on. It was for instrumental performance, and I was in the choir, so we won't stretch too far, but it is true. And Bacon Award, well, my close personal friend Larry Thomas, the Soup Nazi, and I, established my 3 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon there. So if you remember nothing else out of this talk, I hope you remember something else besides the fact that I'm friends with the Soup Nazi.
Got it. And then we said no soup for you. We see the picture. Tim, I'm going to hand it over to you. I'm really pumped about today's webinar. I'm looking forward to it.
Great, and I'm going to hand it right back to you, Alan.
Right.
Why don't we roll that first poll question before we jump in?
Here we go. First poll question for our audience. And again, please, guys and ladies, help us out here. Which of the following best represents your organization's approach to working with security champions? And select one of the following. We don't currently work with security champions. We're evaluating how we could work with security champions. We work with security champions, but on an ad hoc basis. We work with them on a regularly scheduled cadence, or I really don't know what a security champion is, and maybe I don't care. Anyway, guys, please, if you can put your answers in there. We need a few more people to vote. We're going to close it off in about 5, 4, 3, come on, a few more votes, 2, 1, and here's our survey. All right, so Tim, 34% don't know. Maybe they weren't sure what we mean by security champion. But what do you think of the rest of the results? Yeah?
Yeah, that's probably a good place to start. We will definitely talk in the course of the discussion about what we mean when we say security champions and kind of how that fits into the greater DevOps world. But I'm glad to see that a lot of people are here to learn. That's exciting.
Absolutely.
So with that said, we'll go ahead and jump in, and I'm very excited to be talking about this topic. I've talked a lot about DevOps and security testing coming together in other forums. And a lot of times those conversations center around what's happening in the application security pipeline. This isn't one of those talks. This is really not so much about how to automate security testing. And in fact, this conversation really assumes you're already doing that. One of the underpinning points we're going to try to get to in this talk is that we are trying to figure out, as we see the worlds of development and security and operations and other related disciplines coming together, how does the relentless push for automation and for faster turnaround times affect kind of working with organizations and with professions where the job is not maybe as automatable, and how do we overcome both some scarcity in talent in the market and really change the way that security in particular does business and interacts with development organizations, so that we can make kind of putting security in the middle of DevOps more of a reality. But I think one of the takeaways that I have gotten as I've talked to other security teams is you can't even start to talk about how security fits into DevOps if you're still executing application security as a manual process, if you're still configuring web application scanners by hand, if you're still triaging large volumes of findings by hand. We're going to assume for the sake of today's talk that you're already doing automatically initiated, or at least are piloting automatically initiated security scans, and that the data from those is being consumed in some sort of more automated way. This talk is really aimed at kind of what's next, or some of the human factors around that transformation. And as Alan said at the beginning, I've been in the industry for a while. I think a number of folks in the audience probably likely have as well. And I think we've all seen one or more of our transformation efforts kind of hit rocky shoals or outright fail because of failures of soft problems in the execution of that transformation, whether that be failures to manage change effectively, staff shortfalls, or just run-of-the-mill organizational issues. And that's really kind of where we're going to look at from a point of view of how security plays in to the problem of automating AppSec. And one of the reasons that I spend a lot of time on this topic, and that I'm pleased to be able to talk about it today, is I think we kind of all sometimes underestimate the human cost of transformations that change the way people work. I heard somebody say casually one day as he was talking about a DevOps transformation project that he was working on, unfortunately, not everybody gets on the train when you're going through a major transformation in how software is built, or other organizational things. Sometimes people actually get run over by the train, and this is because we're talking about changes in the way people work. We're talking about changes in essentially the attitudes that people have about software is built, how software is being built, and what their roles are in that process. And so what we're trying to avoid is the situation where you collapse the silos between whatever information security function you have at your company and development and operations. We don't want to see headlines like the one here as a consequence of that. So I think one of the interesting questions is security special somehow in this regard? Given that the DevOps movement has been about integrating development, operations, QA, release engineering, lots and lots of functions, why is security any different? And I think the answer is it's not really completely different, but there are some important points to note. One of the points to note is culture clash, right? I blatantly steal this from Pete Cheslock, who used it in a DevOps Days talk a few years ago in Austin. It is the number one thing that you see when you Google for securing DevOps. And it really speaks to some of the inherent culture clash between DevOps and the movement and the goals that it's trying to achieve, and security. And we see that maybe more than other parts of an organization or other disciplines, security has been publicly skeptical of the benefits of DevOps. Part of this is the nature of the trade. Security is professionally cynical. I think that most of us who have been in the security space have seen kind of grand promises that have failed to deliver the potential, or have seen architectures released that were proclaimed secure that were then hacked shortly after their release. Development processes come, development processes go, and insecure software keeps getting built. I think is the kind of first reaction that a lot of people have to the prospect that you're going to take software to a point where you're releasing in a fully automated way. And that culture clash, to put a finer point on it, is really between kind of the enthusiasm and real accomplishments that the DevOps movement has made around bringing software into production in a fully automated, hands-free, fast way, and the real concern that a lot of security organizations have that means that their world is being turned upside down. A lot of organizations hear security and they think gates, they think controls, If you've read Gene Kim's great novel, Phoenix Project, the security guy is the guy with the binder who is trying to make sure that all his checkboxes are checked. You can't accommodate that sort of worldview for working with securing development and still reap the benefits of DevOps, right? And it's the same sort of transformation that QA had to make. There's not so much room for weeks of manual quality assurance testing at the end of a release cycle if you're trying to ship code several times a day, right? So if we're going to bridge this gap, it means two things. Number one, security folks need to basically figure out how to get over their natural skepticism and figure out how to help the DevOps process along, move faster and more safely. I think it also means that developers have to get security conscious as well. And we're going to try to talk a little bit about both sides of the problem as we go through this discussion. Let's figure out where the roadblocks are that we're going to hit, though, as we try to make this transformation and try to bring security into DevOps. And I'm again going to borrow some of Gene's illustrations and to try to frame out the problem. Gene Kim's three ways of DevOps thinking are helpful, I think, in framing the problem, because they highlight some of the areas where there are issues. On the one hand, systems thinking, the first way, we need to see software delivery as an end-to-end system that includes security as part of the overall process and not something that is sitting on the outside or sitting at one end of the process and gating it. On the second way, where DevOps seeks culturally to amplify feedback loops, security needs to help create some of those feedback loops. As things happen in production, security needs to help figure out how to measure and monitor for security events and how to then help the DevOps team interpret and act on those events as they're observed. And the same thing with feedback loops coming from earlier issues in the process, like the discovery of a security issue during a development cycle. And last but not least, security certainly needs to be a participant, if not a leader, in the culture of continual experimentation and learning that drives DevOps forward and makes things happen. So all those things, security is going to need to plug into. So here's the challenge, though. This is a slide that I borrowed from Corey Scott, who's a director of information security at LinkedIn. And in 2015, he did a talk at Black Hat about the issue of the information security talent pool. And what LinkedIn's kind of global data showed them was that for every 4 people already employed in an InfoSec position in 2014, when this data set was drawn, in any part of the data set that they were looking at, there were 3 empty positions looking for people with InfoSec talent and experience. You cannot, kind of solve the information security problem with people because the talent just is not there in the marketplace. It's one of the scarcest job types to, types of people to recruit for. It's one of the hardest positions to fill. We talk to major banks who have positions that sit open for more than a year. One famous case that we learned about was a company that was looking to grow their application testing program, and they were powering it with 4 InfoSec folks. And with those 4 InfoSec folks, they were at a certain scale point, and they needed to dramatically increase their coverage. So they did the math and said, okay, that means we need to hire 20 people. Fast forward a year, and not only had they not filled any of those 20 positions, but they had also lost one of the people that they had in-house already. So 1 year brought them a growth in their AppSec team of -1. So, the way that we traditionally think about solving this problem by building a substantial team or a center of excellence is not ultimately a scalable approach that's going to work across the whole industry, and it's really not going to work as the speed of application delivery increases. As you seek to define security requirements, perform secure code reviews, help the team interpret the results from security testing, and handle security alerts in production across your whole portfolio, you're not going to be able to do that by hiring people to do all those jobs who have InfoSec in their title, especially if you're trying to get more and more of your portfolio to operate at DevOps speed. So, and just to hammer home the point one more time, the other kind of theoretical concern that we sometimes talk about in context of DevOps is the theory of constraints. Again, if you've read the Phoenix Project or other works on the topic, you come across this concept a lot, where you're basically imagining the process from end to end as a factory floor. You're looking for places where work piles up and that constricts the throughput of the process, and that ultimately those places are identified as constraints or bottlenecks. They keep you from releasing product at full velocity, and basically from being able to operate as efficiently as you should be able to operate. So when you think about secure software development, DevSecOps or whatever you want to call it, and you think about the stages in that process: requirements definition, code development, reviewing code, peer review if you practice that, building and testing, and then handling bugs that come back, and then releasing to production. Just about all of those processes have, in a secure development world, some potential touch point between security and development. And so if you've got a scarce resource and you've got a bunch of processes touching on that skill set and that discipline, I think the first pass conclusion that you reach is that security is the bottleneck as you look at secure DevOps. That if you're really trying to build secure software, that the number one thing that you have to do is figure out how to deal with this constraint that you've got, which is the relative shortfall of security talent and the increased challenges on their time that are posed by the rapid release cycles that every organization deals with. So the good thing is that the theory of constraint doesn't just teach us how to draw bottlenecks. It also tells us, kind of a standard process for, dealing with working with those bottlenecks. And, the process basically starts with identifying the constraint, which is what we've just done. You look at the process from end to end and what you're trying to do, and you figure out where the bottlenecks are in making that process happen efficiently. The second thing that you do is and these are the words of the theory from the 1980s. It sounds a little command and control, but there you have it. You have the opportunity to exploit the constraint, and basically what that just means is you're doing as much with the constraint as you can possibly do without making any other changes. And partly, commonly that means making sure that resource or team isn't doing low-value work that could be done elsewhere in the workflow, finding things that you can shift upstream from the team if you possibly can. This is, by the way, one of the reasons why we say, as we're talking about how to do secure DevOps and manage security resources efficiently in the process, we say that you're not ready for this conversation if you're still running application security tools by hand and having your security team do that. And because if you're doing that, really you're in a situation where you're not effectively exploiting the constraint that you've got. That constraint is doing work that they don't need to be doing, and you won't be able to use that capability in your organization to its full potential unless you find a way to shift that work off their desks. The next step is subordinating to the constraint. That is finding a way to adjust the way that the process runs so that you are not letting work pile up in front of the constraint. And that might mean things like figuring out how to make more code changes in such a way that they don't require security review or don't require extensive security review. I don't dwell a lot on that one because I don't think it's necessarily realistic, given that your problem is you don't already have enough security people in the organization in the first place to tell you which changes require security review or not. So that takes us to elevating the constraint. And the definition of elevating the constraint is essentially we're trying to figure out how are we going to break the constraint. Kind of the management literature says that this is the step that you do last because it's usually the one that involves an investment of time or money. And that could be continuous improvement loops, trying to figure out where in the organization there are places for incremental gains. And then once you run through all of that, supplement the constraint with additional throughput. Well, we've already established that it's going to be very challenging to hire people to add throughput to that discipline. So what do? And the answer really is we're going to make more security capability available by building it ourselves. And with that, I'm going to pause for a second in the flow of the slides, and we'll go to the next poll question before we talk about how are we going to do that? How are we going to manufacture more security expertise inside the organization? So Alan, can you give us the next poll question, please?
Sure can, thanks. All right, here we go, everyone. Launch poll. Ooh, oh, John, hold on a second. Can we redo that one, guys? Jules and I double-clicked it. I apologize, Tim. I clicked at the same time Jules did, so he clicked launch, I clicked share. Jules, is there any way of putting that back up quickly? He'll need to redo it. All right, we're putting that back up. While it's back up, though, let me read it to you so when it comes up, we can get done quickly. And it was basically our development team views security as a hindrance and avoids working with our security team. And I'm laughing, but the truth is there's going to be a lot of people who agree with it. And the answers are strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, or strongly agree. And while Jules is getting that back up, looks like it's closed. Tim, unfortunately, I don't know if we're going to be able to get that one back up. I full to blame.
No worries, Alan. We'll press ahead with the assumption that we probably know what the answer was going to be from a lot of people.
Yeah. I will give you, if I can, Tim, one quick anecdote. We did a survey here a while back that said, asking developers what was the biggest drag on them going, faster, and 55% of them said security because it slows them down.
Hey, we have a poll question.
We have it up there. Okay, guys. So while they're answering it, Tim, 55% said security slow them down, and the next question was, what do you want your security team to do? And it was basically slow us down because otherwise we'd go too fast, right? So they wanted their cake and eat it too. But that being said, guys, we've only got less than 50% voted. Come on, give us your votes. We're going to close this up in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and let's see our results.
Yep. Okay. So
There
51% said security is a hindrance, and there's a 7% group that's probably the people who follow me on Twitter that disagrees, but that's awesome. Okay. Again, not surprising, but like you said, sometimes there's some method to that madness, but let's see if we can help address the question of going slow and see if we can get it to go fast instead. So I just had done a build-up, prior to going to the poll question that led us to our big question mark about what do we do to actually elevate and break this constraint. And the answer is security champions, which is the topic that we kind of pre-introduced in the first poll question. What do we mean when we say security champions? So basically what we're trying to describe here is these are folks who work in the DevOps team. Maybe they're from a development background, maybe they're QA or even release engineering, but likely somebody with a highly technical role on the team that is able to perform more basic security tasks that occur with high frequency. And the job there is to take some load off whatever central information security resources you have, or in some cases to compensate for security resources that you don't have, and help the process of DevSecOps get to scale. When I talked about this a few weeks ago to somebody who was out at San Francisco when everybody was out there for RSA and the 12 other conferences that were going on that week, somebody said, it's a guild. And, I thought about it, and I think that's probably right. Just as in organizations that embrace DevOps at scale, you have guilds of people who are UX focused, who are more focused on QA or unit testing or other areas of functional specialization. So too, we would consider security champions spread across an organization with a lot of different teams, kind of performing performing development using DevOps as their approach. The security champions essentially are a guild of folks for whom security is job one. And we'll talk about how we actually kind of recommend that you go through and set up this group of people from scratch. But just to kind of give you a flavor of some of the things that we've seen, security champions, people who aren't professional InfoSec folks, but have received enough training and support and guidance to go through and do these things. The sorts of things that we see security champions successfully doing kind of at scale in commercial software development teams include performing peer reviews looking at security considerations within the review of that code, performing kind of essentially requirement development or what you sometimes hear called grooming in the agile parlance, where you're helping to define kind of as new stories are introduced, what are the security considerations that need to be taken care of, and what does definition of done look like from a security perspective in those stories. A lot of time the code reviews that are conducted are very focused in nature, but are definitely kind of covering important areas like data validation, encoding, logging, things that are kind of the gravity risk that you're always going to have from a security perspective, that are often, surprisingly often handled incorrectly from a security perspective. Product security incident response, for instance, if there's new CVEs that are identified in your product or new CVEs that are identified in a component that you're using, kind of leading the process around responding to that can be something that's done by a security knowledgeable individual on the team, acting as a security champion, and so forth. So, as you think about things that InfoSec might do in a traditional organization, there's an awful lot of these tasks that actually can be done by other parties in the development process, provided that they're prepared properly to do the job and given the support and the resources they need to do it. So that sounds great, but how do we actually make this happen? And we think that there's kind of 3 steps that you need to consider as you're setting up this program, that I'm going to kind of tongue-in-cheek boil down to picking the right people, getting off to a strong start, and empowering the team within carefully prescribed guidelines so that they can be kind of exercising independent judgment, but still in a way that is acting in the best interest of security for the organization. So what we'll talk about a little bit is, with picking the right people, how do we actually go through and kind of set up the requirements for who you bring on board? How do you actually have those conversations with their management? How do you do the initial training, which is crucial? And then how do you continually reinforce that team? And as we go through this latter part of the presentation, I'm going to be drawing examples from Veracod's own experience in scaling our security function internally by standing up a security champion function. And you might expect that a security company like Veracode wouldn't have this problem, but the reality is we're as affected by the talent shortfall in InfoSec as anybody else is. We happen to have hired a lot of good people over the years, but as we grow and more product lines come online, we need more and more people that can help developers do these jobs, and that's kind of how we came to the point of looking at security champions. So based on that experience, I'm going to start with really how not to pick the right people, because this is some of the mistakes that we made in the first roughly year of the program. You unnecessarily constrain yourself if you only look at developers to fill this role and to educate into security champions. As we look at the skill set that modern software development teams have, the naive assumption is you want a developer because you want somebody who knows how code works. Well, the reality is your QA person knows how code works too, because they're writing tests often in QA automation and scripting. Your release engineer knows how code works. The odds are that that person was a developer before. And so there's a wider talent pool to draw from within the team than one might think, and certainly, we recommend that you cast your net a little wider. In fact, sometimes QA people who are also used to thinking about how to break systems can be really good people to train for this function. You also need to make sure that those people have a clear understanding of what the time commitment is. And by the way, this all has to go through the management lines. You're going to be asking these people to spend time on things that are not directly related to producing additional story points worth of functionality. So it's important that management is bought in and understands that these people are going to be ultimately helping things go faster. You also want to make sure that you don't have just one per team, because the idea is to grow the function but not introduce an additional single point of failure. So having a backup is important. Other errors usually cluster around not having clear requirements in mind for who's going to fit the role. And 3 of those anti-patterns are up on the slide. You don't want somebody who's ramping on your organization and your code base at the same time that you're trying to teach them security. Having a brand new hire kind of join this program can often, be counterproductive. You also don't want somebody who is too junior in the organization. We oftentimes find that our junior engineers are the ones that are coming in hot with the biggest ideas, and sometimes that means that they grow into positions of influence relatively quickly. Oftentimes, though, you find the situation where nobody is going to listen to the junior developer because they're a junior developer. So you want to gauge the influence level of the person that you're bringing into the program to make sure that they're going to be able to speak with the right authority for the voice of security. And last but not least, you want to make sure that this individual is not somebody who's already performing a role in the Scrum team. Certainly, product owner or Scrum master. And by a role, I mean a formal role. Certainly everybody is a contributor, but somebody who's got a job as product owner or Scrum master is probably going to be juggling too many other plates to be able to perform the role of security champion effectively. So once you've got the people, what do you do? Well, what we found is that it's really important to start from the very beginning with helping the team understand what the basics are, what the fundamentals are. There's no substitute for formal training in this regard, because there's a certain amount of baseline knowledge you need to have about things like the principles of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The concept that from a security perspective you should trust no one. The idea that security controls need to be implemented server side and not just client side. Deny access by default. Whitelisting rather than blacklisting. Defense in depth. There's a whole bunch of kind of commonly understood and accepted principles in information security that you need to make sure that the security champion has under their belt before they get going. And there's a lot of different ways to get that basic formal training started. Certainly if you have an InfoSec team in-house that has the skill set, you can roll your own training, which is what we did out of necessity. But there's also kind of openly available educational assets, or even consultancies that you can tap to teach some of these skills in a CBT basis or an instructor-led basis. It's better if you can leverage somebody who's already doing an InfoSec job to kind of perform this function rather than relying only on CBTs for the fundamentals, because you really need to make sure that people have a chance to get their questions answered and to help adapt what they're learning to your environment. That said, computer-based training and e-learning are great ways to reinforce the foundational training that you start off with, and to continue to use the team to build the team's skills. And at the outset, you also want to make sure that the team understands that you're committing to an ongoing educational program for them. And this doesn't have to be training. This can be fun. One of the things that we do at Veracode is a monthly capture the flag exercise where we use, generally stuff that's readily available. Go to overthewire.org, and you can hit a lot of different, pre-developed security challenges that are great ways for teams to get some skills under their belt while having a lot of fun at the same time. And last but not least, help the team understand that they're, not going to be trained and then set loose with no guidance, that you are going to have some guidelines for the things that they're going to need to do on an ongoing basis. And that really gets to the third point, which is you want this team to be really empowered within the span of control that you give them. If you're having it so that they have to go back to an information security function for every decision that they're making, you haven't actually scaled the function. You've just added more people asking questions for security. So that means oftentimes, for some of the highly repetitive activities, you're setting guidelines or checklists. Sometimes those are product specific, and those sorts of guidelines are living guidelines. They're updated based on things that you learn as you look at the code base and you test it. Sometimes it's defining guidelines for when you need to do a security review for functionality. The guidelines for number one, does a piece of code need a review at all? Does it have to be reviewed by a security team person? The answer is probably yes if you're introducing a new cryptography module, or if you've got something new that you're introducing that has a lot of different ways that it can be attacked. But if it's relatively small functionality that doesn't have a lot of user interaction, maybe it can be reviewed by a security champion. And these guidelines basically help you to establish your definition of done from a security perspective for the story. And it's also important to give your team of security champions support to help them understand when and how to escalate a security finding. And part of that is helping them understand what is within the scope of their skills and what may be outside, like cryptography and related kind of hard math security topics. Part of it is just process. I've seen a number of cases where a security champion deployment kind of hit rocky shoals because the security champion team had been told to enter requests for involvement as tickets in a certain way, but the InfoSec people weren't looking at that ticket stream as it was coming at them and weren't picking up the requests as they were going. So, establishing the process and making sure that everybody understands how it works is really critical for making this run smoothly. I think the last thing to highlight is what we're accomplishing with, or trying to accomplish with rolling out security champions is not entirely around individual empowerment, although that's a great side effect of this process. Creating a bunch of people who can put InfoSec skills on their resumes is going to make your team happier. But also, the end goal for the organization, which is, actually shipping more secure software more quickly. And so the question that you then ask is, how do you measure the progress of a process like this? And I would argue that you partly measure it in terms of number of security champions onboarded and teams with security champions, but you also want to measure it in terms of the outcome that those teams are attaining. So one way to do that is to think about applying a maturity model for the teams that that are in your organization that are doing this, and establishing kind of what it means to be kind of a baseline from a security perspective versus what it means to be fully mature. There are lots of different maturity models out there that can help you. I will say that a lot of the security maturity models on the market were really aimed at more of a security audience than a development audience. So might be too heavyweight for assessing how far along an individual DevOps team is in getting to kind of security maturity. So, if you're thinking I'm recommending that, every team do OpenSAM and BSIM assessments of their maturity, I think that's probably too heavyweight for most individual, teams to tackle. And I also don't think it's quite aligned with what we're trying to measure. What we did at Veracode was ended up building our own, kind of maturity model that said, these particular practices are the foundations of our application security program, whether that's static testing, whether that's managing the security of open source and third-party components that we're doing, dynamic testing, and other aspects and dimensions of the AppSec, kind of program that we were trying to put out, and then define for each of those, what does it mean to be a basic? What does it mean to be, kind of a beginner, intermediate, advanced expert? And certainly, we've had teams that came in and they were performing very strongly on one or two measures and maybe weren't as far along on another. Teams that came in that were a beginner at everything. And all the security maturity model does is gives you an idea of where you are and then what's your next step. How do you grow from there to build more and more security into your development processes? We think it's also important to set some measurement on individual contributors in this process, because you want to have some idea that the training that you're doing and the continued support that you're giving the team is effective. And so, really one way to do that is certifications on code review. We really found that it was important to do that because otherwise you end up with a lot of code reviews that turn up no findings and that miss things. So, having some measurement of that is important. Last but not least, it's really, really important to make sure that this work is aligned with the goals of the individuals and the teams that are practicing it. So individual goals for security champions might include specifically building up their skills and specific goals around performing code reviews and so forth. Team goals are typically going to be moving along the security maturity model, getting their team from beginner to intermediate on one dimension or another, and making sure that you're continuing to make progress. And that's one way that you can get a better alignment between what the team is trying to do and get more secure, and what the management is looking for with the team. And so if you are successful in doing all of that, you end up with a security champion group that essentially is acting as the security conscience of development, but as part of that development team themselves. And what we found over the years is that there are a lot of security folks out there who will say, developers don't care about security. I don't think that's true. I think that our experience with doing this with customers and helping people learn more about how to secure software is that teams want to learn how to build more secure code. That it's a point of pride once they learn what the issues are. Security champions are a great way to internalize that in the culture of the security team's organization. Last but not least, if you get this flawless, if you really are executing superbly on security champions so that the security InfoSec team is no longer a bottleneck in your organization, the next thing you do is you kind of go back to the top of the cycle and figure out where are the next bottlenecks in your software delivery process, or where are the next things with respect to security that you need to be able to move faster. But that's just a plug to say, don't assume that this is going to solve all your problems. There are a lot of other areas that you might want to look at. I will put one plug in for a white paper that you can download from veracode.com that talks about some additional considerations in doing secure DevOps, of which security champions is one. Really your individual team's challenges are going to be things that you have to figure out looking at your own processes. These are just some ideas that you can look at to figure out how to move things along. So with that, I think we're going to open it up for questions.
Fantastic. Tim, before we get to questions, I loved it. Great presentation. I'm sure our audience liked it as well. In addition to questions coming in from our question section, we also tell people they can submit questions via Twitter. And we did have an incoming question sent in. And let's start with that one, if you don't mind. And Tim, the question is, are there open standards or open efforts for code review certifications? And what are the current standards out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. As we put this program together at Veracode, we had to roll our own in a number of different dimensions, and this is one where we kind of had to figure out, kind of how to measure the team and their performance. Sometimes this is done simply through observation. I mean, I'm not suggesting that we need a new CISSP multiple choice kind of approach here, but sometimes a way that you can measure this is to have somebody who's more senior in the team ride along with an individual and provide them with feedback on their performance as they do code review activities, as they do security grooming and so forth. So less a true certification than just kind of ongoing mentoring and feedback. That said, if folks are interested in kind of what ways that we've come up with to measure beyond that, I'm certainly happy to see what we can do to make that available.
Great. Tim, let me get to our next question. This is from Hans Helf, and hopefully I haven't messed it up. But it goes to your recommendation around security champions and one security champion per team. And in an agile R&D team that's small, under 10, yeah, that certainly can make sense. But what do you suggest, one champion per agile team or per release team when we, a safe environment, maximum 125 developers in total?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of the recommendations here are really specific to assuming that you're already doing agile development and you've got kind of your classic 2 pizza size team, and so when we say 1 per team, really the concern is just making sure that anywhere that a team is developing requirements, that they are kind of reviewing code artifacts and helping to digest incoming things that are happening in production, that there's somebody that can help that team out. And I think that, kind of the model of agile development where you have potentially, even in a, moderate-sized organization, maybe 20 teams, is where you particularly feel the burn on not having enough security expertise to go around. In more, traditional organizations where you have a more monolithic team, larger team, your numbers might be a little off. You might be able to get away with fewer people performing that function, but I don't think I would go to 1 per team if your team is 125 people. There's probably some smaller working segments inside that group of the organization where you can find kind of subdivisions of that group to insert the security champion function into.
Got it. Okay, let's get to our next question then, if it's okay, Tim.
Yep.
This comes from Stephanie. I'm going to mispronounce your last name, and I apologize. Let's leave it at Stephanie. How will the security champion interact with the developers if he or she is not part of the Scrum team?
Well, that's a really good question, and the answer ideally is that person is part of the Scrum team. And I think I made this a little confusing when I talked about the requirements for membership in the guild, and I said that you shouldn't already have a formal role on the Scrum team. And what I meant by that is one of the roles that are defined by Scrum, product owner or Scrum master. Those are really in most organizations already full-time jobs. But the security champion really needs to be somebody who's got shared responsibility and a shared fate for the products that team is developing. The way that it works in the cases that I've seen, it's generally, sometimes a senior developer, sometimes QA engineer who's carrying work in the sprint. But as part of their job, they're also participating in story grooming, which they may have been doing already, just now they're doing it wearing a security hat, and performing code reviews, which again they may have already been doing. So I think it's more like these are individuals that are already in the team, they're already helping to ship the software. They now have an additional body of knowledge that they can draw from when they're performing these tasks, which Agile and by extension kind of Agile derived practices recommend that you do around kind of understanding the quality of that which you're putting out by these activities of defining the stories and reviewing the code artifacts.
Got it. All right, let's jump to another one if we can. And guys in the audience, if you do have a question, do feel, sorry, please feel free to post it on here. We'll try to get to them. Tim, this comes at it more from the, what can the security person do? And it's, what are some of the first steps that security can take to participate in the culture of continual experimentation and learning?
I think that there's a couple of things, but I think the most important thing to start with is if the security team is not already directly engaged with the folks that are building the software, that's probably the best place to start. One of my recommendations to anybody who is, kind of trying to help development teams go faster is to start by listening to the development team for a while, because you can come in, if you're not careful, with some preconceived notions based on your own prior experience about how things are being done and what the team is doing, only to find out, kind of after you've already espoused those preconceived notions, that things are actually working differently in that team and that there are different pressures and different issues. And so we strongly recommend that, starting with listening to what the reality on the ground and honestly developing empathy for what the team may be struggling along with is the most important place to start. After that, my recommendation is really, to work with the team to figure out where, from a retro perspective, the team is challenged, and look at that as a place to start engaging with the team. So, for instance, the team retros and talks about the fact that they had a security finding recently. Well, that's a great place to start. Going in and taking a look at the nature of the finding and figuring out, kind of how to break down the root cause of that in a way that doesn't lay blame on people, but treating it as a learning opportunity to figure out how to help the team get that problem solved. Or maybe it's helping them figure out how to react when something like the most recent struts vulnerability comes out, and what they can do to improve their time to fix around problems like that. I think that a lot of it depends on what you learn from the team as you listen to them, and on helping them solve problems that they're already trying to solve, rather than coming in with a preset agenda.
Got it. Tim, well, we have a few more questions. We have one person writes, we have a very small team dedicated to security. What are some of the ways we can automate some of the training and practices you lay out here today?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I would say that there's a couple of things. Number one, we know that there are going to be some ongoing training requirements. As I said, those are, kind of starting with a pre-canned set of security fundamentals training, or, other training and secure development practices is a good way to kind of not have to reinvent the wheel on that. For the foundational training, it's a little bit more challenging because, again, we do recommend that be done in person, but maybe once you develop that curriculum, your scale move is making sure that you record that introductory class so that you can onboard somebody quickly into the program, and then kind of engage with them afterwards by more hands-on mentoring. There's a lot of different ways to address the scale problem. I think the fundamental concern is you don't want to be so successful with the security champion program that you're spending all your time dealing with security champions and no time doing any other parts of the job of information security. And so where you can look for opportunities to automate, certainly do that. I think that the other thing that's really important here is really the laying down of guidelines. If you have a predefined set of rules for how you review code, for the sorts of issues that you want to flag, as specific as you can with code examples, then you're going to achieve more scale in helping that team be productive.
Great. All right, Tim, I just see one more question here, and we only have a few minutes, so I appreciate it. We're still relying on our MPTs for application security scanning. How do we integrate their processes into what you suggest around security champions?
Okay, so there's a couple of different things there, and it's I'll try to keep it brief because this could be another talk, but I think that there's really three things that you have to do with manual testing. The first is if you can integrate other forms of security testing earlier in the process so that you're not getting a 200-page PDF from your manual penetration tester at the end of the process, you'll be already a lot farther along to being able to make them a part of what you're doing. That said, an area where a lot of late in the cycle testing like MPT breaks down is helping developers absorb the results and do something with them, and that's a great place for security champions. People who are part of the team, already engaged with the team, can help by helping to digest those results, break them into the team's backlog, figure out kind of what does it needs to have immediate kind of response and what can be dealt with at a later date is really important. But my first recommendation with MPT, we do it. We need it's important to do and to apply kind of human intelligence to the security problem, but it shouldn't be your only security testing process. You should be automating as much as you can before that.
Great. Tim, that brings us right up against the top of the hour, so I'm hesitant to do any other questions. You got to respect people's time is what I've learned doing these. And Tim, I respect your time. You did a great job. Many thanks to you and the folks at Veracode for helping us here today on the webinar. I think it was a great webinar on a topic that I really like. Let's talk. Well, we will be doing more webinars with Veracode, so we'll continue the conversation. And I invite those of you still on here to join us in that. Tim, thanks very much. Tim Jarrett of Veracode. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We hope to see you on another DevOps.com webinar soon. This is Alan Schimmel for DevOps.com. Have a great day, everyone.